God bless you. Welcome to the Gathering Echo and New Testament Church of the Firstborn. We welcome you in. Those who are viewing online, go ahead and like and subscribe. Go ahead and share. And if you do want to give, there's a link down below the video for you to give on our website through Subsplash. So again, thank you so much to everybody who's here this morning. How many of you enjoyed that worship music this morning? It's good stuff, ain't it? That last one, that's a kicker. It's one that's stuck with me for a while. Like AJ said, we've been working on that for it's been going on about 3 or 4 or 5 years, something like that. So we finally got there. Praise God. Well, this morning there's been a little bit of a theme in the songs, but the main thing, the first song that we sang is "The Goodness of God." I'm sure many of you have heard that online there, but one of the lines in the song is that you've been faithful, right? That God's been faithful. He's been nothing but good. Even when it seems like the world is falling apart, life is falling apart, there's something about the faithfulness of God. So this morning, the title of my sermon or message or whatever is "You're Full of It." It's really more of a question. Are you full of it? Listen, I've been told many a time I'm full of something, you know what I'm saying? My eyes are brown, you know. But faithful, the word faithful is it's a word that brings certain people to mind, right? It's a word reserved for the best of friends, the strongest of spouses, and top-notch employees, and those that devote their lives to a cause or a religion, a business, a family, or even a community, right? That's a word that's reserved for somebody that has really strong character. Those folks are usually somebody that you can count on, you can depend on. You know that they're going to do what they say they're going to do, and they're going to be there when they say they're going to be there, right? That's what a faithful person is and does. And that's part of kind of the definition of the word faithful. So the English definition, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is remaining loyal and steadfast. Well, that's pretty simple, right? Loyal, like a dog. I don't mean that as an insult. I mean literally like a dog, right? How many of you have a dog? Praise God. I know you're on your way to heaven. How many of you have a cat? I'll pray for you. I'm just kidding. Sorry to all the cat people out there. Oh, you got 2 cats. Oh, Lord. No, dogs are loyal, right? I have a dog, and she is, I don't know, she's like on a whole nother level when it comes to like commitment to an owner. So we rescued her from the shelter, and the day we went and met her, the whole family went, you know, we hung out with her. At the time we had another dog, so we did a little meet and greet kind of thing, right? And that all went really well. So I went back, I think it was the next day or a couple days later, to pick the dog up. And get her home, you know, and it's all good, right? I mean, things are good for the most part. We found out, we picked her up, I think, the week of Thanksgiving. My wife's not here. She would remember better. I think it was a week of Thanksgiving or a week before or something like that last year. And we were leaving for Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. And next thing you know, one of the kids is like, "The dog's out in the front yard." Like, what? She had jumped the fence in the backyard. And so that's how we figured out that she could jump fences. And so she regularly went on, and still does it from time to time, went on little adventures. But the only thing we could figure was that she was looking for me, because after I brought her home, it was like she wouldn't leave my side, like at all whatsoever. And so, of course, you know, come Monday, I got to go to work. Well, I go to work, and my wife's like, she's just been like nuts all day. Like she's freaking out. She can't find you. You know, she doesn't know what to do, whatever. And so then I come home from work, and she greets me at the door. I mean, the dog, like, You could hear her outside the door, just like all this noise, And I come in the door and she greets me with a hug. Like she literally will jump up and like wrap her arms around you. And so it's just like I said, it's a whole nother level of loyalty from an animal. But, that's what faithfulness is, right? Somebody that's steadfast, somebody you can count on. So true to the facts or the original is also another definition. So again, those are the definitions that are given by the Oxford Dictionary. And they sort of call forward these pictures, right, in your mind. When you think about something or someone that is faithful, right, you think regularity and you think maybe solid, right, something like a rock, right, something that you can build on, some fundamental materials that you can build your life on. Now, if you trace back kind of the etymology of the word faithful, it comes from like some Latin words and this, that, and the other from around the 14th century. And it means a few different things. So sincerely religious, devout, or pious, right? So when we think about the word faithful, we might think of someone that, again, is devoted to their religion, right? Or their community or their cause or whatever, ideology. But, that's one of the meanings. Also loyal, right? To a lord, a friend, a spouse. Yeah, I mean, if you're married, hopefully you're living faithfully with your mate. You're being faithful to your partner, right? True, honest, trustworthy. Ouch, that's a tough one. Worthy of trust, right? That's as simple as it gets, right? Trustworthy, worthy to be trusted. Well, that's what this word is calling out, right? It's accurate when it comes to a story or an eyewitness account, right? It's accurate, it's reliable, true to the facts. As a noun, it means a true believer or one who is full of faith. That's what we're looking for. That's the definition we're looking for. Full of faith. So, my question to you this morning is, are you full of it? I hope you're full of it. One thing is for sure, God is full of it. God is full of faith. So let's go to, I guess I should have had this pulled up already. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 3. When you get there, say amen. 2 Thessalonians 3, 3. Praise God. So in verse 2, Paul writes and he says, "And that we may be delivered from unreasonable and wicked men, for all men have not faith." So Paul gives some final words of comfort to the Thessalonians in the wake of the false claim about Christ's return. The word faith in the Greek is pistis. And that's in verse 2 there. And then he goes on in verse 3, he says, but, conjunction, there's a big old but in that next verse. But the Lord is faithful, who shall establish you and keep you from evil. Now that word is pistos. Let me pull that up. That word is pistos. Guess what it means? Trustworthy. Trustworthy. So all men have not faith. They don't have persuasion or credence. They don't have conviction. They've not been convinced. They don't have reliance on Christ. They don't have constancy. But the Lord is trustworthy. The Lord is trustful. It comes from the word patho or patho, and that means to convince, or passively to assent. Now, try not to lose all this stuff here. If we continue in the etymology of the word, it means complete trust or confidence in someone or something. Faithfulness to to a trust or a promise. Loyalty to a person, honesty and truthfulness. Comes from the Latin word fides. That means trust, faith, confidence, credence, reliance, belief. Fidere, and that means to trust. It is, listen to this, faithfulness, or faith rather, sorry. I didn't tell you that right. I said faithful, right? But it's faith. This is the word faith. Faith is the assent of the mind to the truth of a statement for which there is incomplete evidence. Assent of the mind to the truth of a statement for which there is incomplete evidence. Now, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 said it like this. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. That's what faith is. So confidence in a person or thing with reference to truthfulness, fidelity of one spouse to another, a sworn oath. Now, faithfulness, right, or faithful, is an adjective, right? It's a descriptive word. It's a word that is used to describe, just as we read in 2 Thessalonians, to describe God throughout the Scriptures. So let's go look at a couple other examples here. Lamentations chapter 3, verse 22 and 23. Lamentations 3, 22, 23. And I'm reading these verses out of the ESV. I think that's the English Standard Version. Lamentations 3:22 and verse 23. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. Now, let's go back a verse. I think I left one out there. Might be verse 21 as well. What do you think there, Bishop Kello? This I recall to my mind. So Jeremiah is having to remind himself, because earlier in the chapter, he's going on about all these things, all these terrible things that have happened, right? He says, if we back up a little bit, he says, surely against me is he turned. He turneth his hand against me all the day. My flesh and my skin hath he made old. He hath broken my bones. He hath builded against me and compassed me with gall and travail. He hath set me in dark places as they that be dead of old. He hath hedged me about that I cannot get out. He hath made my chain heavy. Also, when I cry and shout, he shutteth out my prayer. He hath enclosed my ways with hewn stone. He hath made my paths crooked. He was unto me as a bear lying in wait and as a lion in secret places. But if you go down to verse 21, he says, this I recall to my mind. Therefore have I hope. Therefore have I hope. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, saith my soul. Therefore will I hope in him. Therefore will I hope in him. Matthew Arnold said it like this in 1873 when some of his lectures were published, or his writings were published in a title called Literature and Dogma. He said, faith is neither the submission of the reason, nor is it the acceptance simply and absolutely upon testimony of what reason cannot reach. Faith is the being able to cleave to a power of goodness, appealing to our higher and real self, not to our lower and apparent self. Faith is the being able to cleave to a power of goodness, appealing to our higher and real self, not to our apparent and lower self. Let's go to Romans chapter 3. Sorry to have you jumping around here a little bit. Oh, my goodness. Thank you, Jesus. Actually, let's don't go to Romans 3. Let's go to Deuteronomy 7. Deuteronomy 7, sorry. Getting a little ahead of myself. Deuteronomy 7, verse 9. Oh, man, here it is. My goodness. My goodness. So, just to begin this chapter, let's see, is this the right verse? No, this isn't it. I'm sorry. I'm thinking about, okay. Deuteronomy 7:9. How about 7:8? But because the Lord loved you, and because he would keep the oath which he had sworn unto your fathers, hath the Lord brought you out. Now, remember, faithfulness, the sworn oath. It's the promise, the one that keeps the promise, the faithful one. Hath the Lord brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you out of the house of bondmen from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Know therefore, what does that word know mean? Know. Oh, yeah, it just means to know, yada. Yeah, to know, literally. Literally to know. Know therefore. Now, if you know something, right, I mean, you know it, right? You know it. I know it. Maybe I know it because somebody told me, but probably I know it because I've experienced it, right? And that's two different knowings, right? That's two different scenarios. Somebody can tell you how to change a tire, but until you have to get out in the rain on the side of the highway and, it's freezing cold and your spare tire's up under your truck and you got to crawl up under the mud and you got to get that thing out and all that dirt and dust and everything else and road grimes falling on your face and you get stuff in your eye and then you drag the thing out there and then the jack don't halfway work, right? That's a different kind of knowing, right? So know therefore that the Lord thy God, and the Lord thy God, that's Jehovah, okay? Know therefore that Jehovah, thy God, he is God. He is Elohim, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. 1,000 generations. Now, that's a long time. That's a long time. Now, the interesting thing here, this word faithful in the Hebrew, it is the word alman. Alman. And that means to build up or support, to foster as a parent or nurse. Okay? To render firm or faithful, to trust or believe, to be permanent or quiet. To be permanent or quiet. So Jehovah is God, the faithful God, which keeps covenant and mercy with those that who love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. Now, you guys know I like the pictograph thing, right? Picture language, okay? This is like primordial stuff, right? So the picture is that of the seed, the seed of man, right? It just fascinates me that they had any comprehension of what this would look like. Because if you look at the picture, it looks like a sperm cell. It's exactly what it looks like. So, it's the picture of the seed of man, right? And then it's this little squiggly line which represents water or fluid, okay? But it also means, it could be something like blood, so liquid, so water or blood more than likely. All right, so combined, these mean blood continues, all right? So each species or kind continues by passing its blood to the next generation. It also is the word portion. So what comes from something else as one kind comes from the same. What comes from something else as one kind comes from the same. So in other words, right, If God is the faithful God, then He is the one who continues this faithfulness. Where does He continue this faithfulness? In the next generation, right? In the next generation. So the Father, in all of His faithfulness, right? That is a description of God's character, which is something that you generally find throughout the Old Testament, right? There's all sorts of scriptures, whether it's the Psalms or it's in the Torah, in those early books where they're talking about God. They'll say God, they'll say Jehovah, but then they'll list all these descriptive words behind it, right? So God, Jehovah, oh yeah, by the way, He's the faithful God. He's full of faith. And not only that, but He's the one who's continuing this faith. So from the Father to the Son, it passes on. So, what of God's faithfulness? Let's continue to look through the scriptures here. So let's go to Romans chapter 3. I'm sorry. Exodus 34. Okay. I'm going to try not to do that to you again, I promise. Exodus 34. I know Margie's gonna bump me upside the head after the service here. All right, Exodus 34. I think it's verse 6 and 7. Okay, all right. This is the one I wanted to. So, the beginning of 34 here is Moses has gone up and back down the mountain, and then all this chaos ensues, and he breaks the stone tablets that God created. Right? He gave him. So then he says, now you're going to do it. You're going to carve out the stone and I'll write on it. Right? So it says, the Lord said to Moses, hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first. This is verse 1, by the way. And I will write upon these tables the words that were in the first tables which thou breakest. And be ready in the morning and come up in the morning unto Mount Sinai and present thyself there to me in the top of the mountain. And no man shall come up with thee, neither let any man be seen throughout all the mount, neither let the flocks nor herds feed before that mount. So he got 2 stones. Next day he goes up, etc., etc. 34 verse 6. And the Lord passed by before him and proclaimed, the Lord, Jehovah God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abundant in goodness and truth. Now, again, I was reading that in the ESV earlier. It says, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. But then he says, and will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and upon the children's children unto the 3rd and the 4th generation. And Moses made haste. Moses hurried up and bowed down his head toward the earth and worshiped. And he said, if now I have found grace in thy sight, O Lord, let my Lord, I pray thee, go among us, for it is a stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for thine inheritance. And then in verse 10, God makes a decision in His faithfulness, in the steadfast love, the mercies that continue from one generation to the next for thousands of generations. He said, behold, I make a covenant. Before all thy people I will do marvels, such as have not been done in all the earth, nor in any nation, and all the people among which thou art shall see the work of the Lord, for it is a terrible thing that I will do with thee. Observe thou that which I command thee this day. Behold, I drive out before thee all these people, for thou shalt worship no other God, for the Lord whose name is jealous is a jealous God, lest thou make a covenant with inhabitants, etc., etc. Thou shalt make thee no molten gods, and then we get into the rest of the 10 Commandments, right? The covenant, though, of God. It's the renewal of the covenant, right? So God had already made this covenant then all this stuff happens. He comes back. Moses comes back, and in God's faithfulness, he says, you know what? I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to show love again. I'm going to show mercy again. I'm going to provide grace again. Over and over, God in His faithfulness shows us mercy, gives us grace, gives us forgiveness, gives the children of Israel. I mean, you can read the stories. There's plenty of stories in there about that nation in particular. Running away from God, abandoning the covenant, disavowing themselves of anything that had to do with Jehovah God. And yet, over and over, He receives them back, takes them back in. All right, Romans chapter 3. Romans 3, 1 to 4. What advantage has the Jew? Or what is the value of circumcision? Much in every way. To begin with, the Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God. What if some were unfaithful? Does their faithfulness nullify the faithfulness of God? By no means. By no means. Let God be true, though everyone were a liar. As it is written, that you may be justified in your words and prevail when you are judged. Does your faithfulness or does your faith activate God's faithfulness, or is it the other way around? Because you're a human, right? You're a person. You have this humanity. You have this soul that you have to contend with, right? And it's dishonest. It's manipulative. It's hiding. It's running away. It's all these things, right? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I deal with some of those things, right? Deceptive. And oftentimes it's more of I'm deceiving me than I am anybody else. I'm deceiving myself, and of God, right? And so we wear these masks, we wear these, or we put on these charades, right? And we pretend to be something that we're not, right? We come in, especially in churches, we come in on a Sunday morning, we're wearing our Sunday's best, we're putting a smile on our face, and we're pretending like everything is okay. Everything is perfect. There is nothing wrong in my life. There's nothing bad. I'm not doing anything. I'm not having anything going on. I'm not facing any difficult circumstances, right? Nope, I'm all good. That's what we do. But it's the deception within ourselves, of ourselves, right? And a lot of times that's hiding, that's running away from whatever it is. Maybe it's just facing up to something. Maybe it's responsibility. Maybe it's the fact that you're loved, but you can't see yourself that way. You can't view yourself as loved. You can't view yourself as wanted. You can't view yourself as a part. Even though God, in His faithfulness, has continued Himself, right? He's perpetuated Himself into the earth inside of you. He didn't choose to live in dogs or cats or horses or whatever, right? Now, I'm saying the Spirit of God is in all living things because Christ is all in all, right? But He chose to manifest Himself as a divine being inside of you. That's how He chose to do it. All right, so we just read Romans, right? Okay. 2 Timothy chapter 2. Chapter 2, verse 11. 2 Timothy 2:11. No, I think I read this in the mirror. Thank you, Jesus. Second Timothy 2:11. And let's just read it in the King James, and then I'll read it to you in the mirror. It is a faithful saying, for if we be dead with Him, we shall also live with Him. If we suffer, we shall also reign with Him. If we deny Him, He also will deny us. If we believe not, yet He abideth faithful. He cannot deny Himself. Now that seems a little contradictory, but let's read this in the mirror. The logic of God endorses our faith. We were included in his death and are therefore equally included in his resurrection. Sufferings do not distract us, neither do they contradict our joint position with him in the throne room. The Christ life rules. If we contradict ourselves, behave unlike ourselves, he will contradict us and prove us wrong. Our unbelief does not change what God believes. He cannot contradict himself. And this goes back to Romans 3. What we believe about God does not define him. God's faith defines us. God cannot be untrue to himself. I can't say it any better. God cannot be untrue to himself. God cannot deny himself. It's like you having your children, and they look like you, right? They look like you, they talk like you, they act like you. I mean, like even little kids, right? Little ones. They act like you acted when you were little, right? Because it's a continuation of you. As much as it is a totally separate individual, it is also a continuation of you. It is part of your eternity, right? Perpetuation of yourself. I see it. I've seen it forever in my son, but even now in my 4-year-old daughter. She's a lot like my wife, but she's a whole heck of a lot like me too. She looks like my wife. Let's put it that way. She looks just like her, okay? But she acts like me. She is so defiant. It's unbelievable. Like last night, like it went from 0 to 100 in like 30 seconds, right? It was like, hey, I need you to come out here, clean up this stuff that you made a mess, blah, 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 whatever. And next thing you know, it's like, I ain't doing that. And then I'm like, oh, I ain't having that. And it's on then, right? It's on like Donkey Kong. I said, you get out of here. You get out here and get this up. And she said no. And I said, well, then you're going to bed. And she said no. I literally drug her off the bed. I walked her to the bathroom. We brushed her teeth. That took a lot. We brushed her teeth, and I put her in the bed, right? Because I knew. I was like, man, this is me 100% right here. You're not going to tell me what to do. If you tell me what to do, I'm not going to do it just to spite you. Like my wife, if she says, don't say that, don't do that, quit, whatever, oh, I'm going to aggravate the heck out of you. It's on then, right? Stop saying that. Oh, nope, there it went. We went right to 100 every time. But because she's a continuation of me. And like I said, she's got her own personality. She has her own individuality. But it's a reflection of me, right? Reflecting back to myself. And of course, too, it helps me even with my son, like I said, especially. So he looks just like me. He acts like I acted when I was a kid, all that. But he's a reflection of me as well. And as he's grown, I've learned, right, how to deal with me through dealing with him. I've learned. And, but anyway, so the faithfulness of God continues in us, and he can't deny himself. You can't deny your kids. Like I said, they look like you, they act like you, they sound like you, all the stuff. They eat like you, like whatever. Like the whole thing. He cannot deny himself. He can't deny you. So stop denying yourself. In denying yourself, you're denying God. In unbelieving yourself, you're unbelieving God. I know that's not really right, but either way. So, let's see, do I have another one? 1 John 1:9. And actually, I'm going to read that in the mirror. So you don't even have to turn there. You can write that down for your notes. 1 John 1, verse 9. Our conversation takes on a brand new dynamic when we take sides with what God believes about us. So instead of telling God about the detail of your sin, you remind yourself about the detail of your redemption. God doesn't need the information. You do. God's faithfulness, there it is, and righteousness is the basis of our forgiveness and cleansing from every distortion. Jesus removed every bit of condemning evidence against us. The word confession is the word homologeo, from the word homos, which is the same, and the word logos, which is the word. Logic. The context of verse 7 suggests that we say what God says about us. Verse 7. We are invited to explore the dimensions of the same light that engulfs God. When we see the light in His light, fellowship ignites. In this light, we understand how the blood of Jesus Christ is the removal of every distortion and stain of sin. The word translated forgiveness or remission is the word aph-I-me, from apo, which is away from, and hi-I-me, an intense form of I-me, which is I am. Thus, forgiveness is in essence a restoring to your true I amness. The injury, insult, shame, hostility, or guilt would no longer define the individual. Injury, insult, shame, hostility, or guilt would no longer define the individual. So, that's a little bit about God's faithfulness, or God's faith, right? Let's see. Yes. So what of our faith? Well, I've been told basically my whole Christian life which is basically my whole life, as I was raised in church, right? You got to have mustard seed faith, right? Yeah, y'all heard that? Mustard seed faith. Okay, so faith, like a tiny mustard seed or a tiny seed, is what Christ says that we need to move mountains. If you had faith like this grain of a mustard seed, then you could say to this mountain, move from here to there, right? In other words, you could do impossible things. Does this mean that it takes a small amount of faith? Or is it that faith is new or young, budding, right? We talked about that too, the young faith, the budding faith, like that of a child who blindly follows another into a fantastical world. Last night, before the utter chaos ensued, right, with the whole bedtime routine, my daughter was, we were cooking dinner, and my daughter just pops out of the hallway into the kitchen living room area, and she's like, "The floor is lava!" That's it. Nothing else, no warning, just, "The floor is lava!" And so I'm standing on the hard floor, and I step over on the rug, and she's like, "Daddy, the floor is lava!" And I'm like, "I know." And so, we just, here it goes, right? Now all of a sudden we're in a whole new world. Our house is a volcano, right? You have no other choice. If you step on the hard floor, your feet are going to burn off. Unfortunately, my feet did burn off. Thankfully, through the miracles of modern medicine, I was able to get them restored last night, even though my ankle is still hurting. Okay. Sorry, okay, you guys didn't join me in the fantasy there, okay? Come on in, right? It's an invitation for you to laugh because that is ridiculous. But that's what children do, right? They walk up to you and they're already in another world, right? And so they're just like, hey, by the way, what you're living in right now is not reality. Come join me in the real world. That's what children do. They invite us into the fantasy. They invite us, and children, if you play with them, right, they will blindly follow you into that fantastical world. Whatever it is that you create, right? They will just, all in. Here we go. I'm diving in. I'm going deep. Get over my head. I want to be caught in the rush, lost in the flow. Get over my head. I want to go, right? Okay, sorry. That's a 90s song, I think. Yeah, as if the floor was really lava, right? So is it that? Is it blindly following into this thing? Or is it a faith that needs to go into the ground? Like Christ said, a seed can't live except that it goes into the ground and it first dies. So does it need to go into the ground of our good heart, the good soil of our heart, and die to our own logic, and understanding, so it can be resurrected in newness of life by the revelation that it's not my faith that activates God's faithfulness, but it's God's faithfulness that initiates, animates, and energizes my faith. Because I think it's the latter. I think it's that the seed of faith that was planted in you. Because remember, that word faith, alman, it is the seed, it is the blood, it's the continuation. The seed was planted in you. So let it die to your logic, to your reasoning. Let it die to, what was the word you used, Pastor, from Wednesday night? Oh my gosh, I'm blanking. It's a C word. You got it. So let it die to your logic, your reasoning, right? That you become conceited. That was the word. Conceited, right? You become conceited thinking that your ideas are better than God's ideas. That's exactly. You're wise in your own eyes, right? But stop thinking that you know you better than God knows you. And start agreeing with, now this takes faith, right? This is where the faith comes in. Start agreeing with what it is that God says about you. Now, I understand that there is what Brennan Manning calls the enormous difficulty. The enormous difficulty. So he wrote a book. It's called The Ruthless Trust. It's called Ruthless Trust, not The Ruthless Trust. Ruthless Trust, and it's literally just about trust, about trusting God. And I know that sometimes it is very difficult. I'm trying to find this page. To trust that God, in His quote-unquote, right, infinite wisdom, can be trusted. In all of His power and knowing and all those things, that He can be trusted. I know sometimes it's difficult because of the things that we face. I want to read you a little bit of this, some excerpts out of this book. So he starts the chapter, The Enormous Difficulty. He starts it with, "Forever I will sing the goodness of the Lord," Psalm 89:1. How difficult for me to sing that song when a morning phone call delivered the news that my 41-year-old friend, Rich Mullins, had been killed in a gruesome auto accident just a few hours earlier in Illinois. Without explanation, I turned down several requests to speak at memorial services in his honor in Nashville, Wichita, and Chicago. I was lost in the tangled, dark, and frightening inner world of my grief, doubt, and fear, and anger over Rich's death. Taste and see the goodness of the Lord, Psalm 34:1. How hard for Ann Donovan when she delivered a stillborn baby. She said, those things I had relied on, modern science, women's intuition, God's mercy, had failed. And I had nothing to hold on to. Throughout the excruciating suffering of the human experience, Jesus remains in Raymond Nogar's striking phrase, the Lord of the absurd. And hope in the resurrection promise stands firm and unassailable. However, to the grief-stricken wife whose husband and 3 small children have just been killed by a drunken driver, reassurances of eternal life offer little solace. Likewise, Ann Donovan, after the delivery of her stillborn child, heard only mocking laughter from the heavens when a well-intentioned friend recited a saccharine poem with this gruesome message. God had looked around heaven and decided that it needed some brightening up, so He plucked a vivid flower, her stillborn baby, to cheer the place up. She said, I just clenched my teeth to keep from saying something I'd regret. When the heartstrings are suddenly cut, it is, I believe, a physical impossibility to feel faith or resignation,
There is a revolt of the instinctive and animal system, and though we may submit to God, it is rather by constant, painful effort than sweet attraction. From the gross impiety of the Salem witch trials down to the blasphemous, implacable images of a vindictive deity today, terror of a merciless God has haunted many a Christian conscience, making believers distrust even motherhood, the flag, and apple pie. The bromides, platitudes, and exhortations to trust God from the nominal believers who have never visited the valley of desolation are not only useless, they are textbook illustrations of unmitigated gall. Only someone who has been there, who has drunk the dregs of our cup of pain, who has experienced the existential loneliness and alienation of the human condition, dares whisper the name of the holy to our unspeakable distress. Only that witness is credible. Only that love is believable. After Paul, after his conversion on the road to Damascus, Jesus said to Ananias, I myself will show him how much he himself has to suffer for my name. Anyone God uses significantly is always deeply wounded. It's no coincidence that the title of the latest book by Michael Ford on the life and ministry of Henry Nouwen is The Wounded Prophet. We are, each and every one of us, insignificant people whom God has called and graced to use in a significant way. In His eyes, the high-profile ministries are no more significant than those that draw little or no attention and publicity. On the last day, Jesus will look us over not for medals, diplomas, or honors, but for scars. Now, Irenaeus, a disciple of the Apostle John, becomes our guide in his 5-volume work Against the Heresy of Gnosticism. The oft-quoted first clause of one compound sentence reads, the glory of God is the human being fully alive. But the less quoted second clause reads, and the life of the human consists in beholding God. Consists in beholding God. Now, got one more little part here. I know, like I said, at times it's difficult to believe that God is faithful. I mean, so from 2020, I got COVID one time, and then I think it was 21, I think I got COVID again. But ever since I've had COVID, the first time, I've been sick. Like, I can't really explain it. You know, some days it's better than others, but most days I wake up with tons of inflammation and pain in my body. You know, my gut health is wrecked. You know, all these things, right? And the other week I sprained my ankle. I chipped my tooth all in the same weekend. It was really aggravating. I'm still kind of getting over the ankle thing, but regardless, right? It's like when you have these moments, right? And let me back up a little bit, because when I got sick after I had COVID, it wasn't just the physical illness that was getting me. It was everything else that happened. I had this barrage of psychological issues, mainly with just anxiety, depression. At one point I felt suicidal, and I was dealing with this intense anxiety. I didn't want to leave the house. I barely wanted to get out of bed, but I definitely didn't want to go places. I didn't want to necessarily be around people, all those kinds of things. So it was just debilitating. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my heart's racing, my chest is killing, feels like somebody's sitting on my chest, tightness in my back, all this stuff. And I just had this over and over. And it went on. It was months and months. And then, some of that sort of calmed down, and still had little bits of it over the last 3 years. Just the other week, I was telling my wife, I was at the dentist. I was getting my tooth fixed. And out of nowhere, like, I just felt super duper anxious, right? I'm in the chair, they're working on my tooth. I was just like, I can't breathe. And that was the thought that hit my head, right? My throat was closing up, felt like I couldn't get a breath, chest is getting tight, all this stuff, right? And look, like, if you know me, you know that, like, that's not me.
I've never been like that. When I was a little kid, I had some stuff. I had some like panic attacks at school or whatever. But I grew out of that. Right, it was gone, or so I thought. So dealing with all of that, it had me in this place of this is very difficult to believe. It's very difficult to believe that God is faithful. It's very difficult to believe in the face of heart attack and cancer and all these things, diagnoses and circumstances, right? In the face of addiction and bondage, in the face of abuse, neglect, it's very difficult to believe sometimes that God is faithful. But it's in those moments, and it's in those places that we have to be like Jeremiah, and we have to recall to our mind that the faithfulness of God is for thousands of generations. It is perpetual. Not only has it continued in humanity, it's continued in your life in particular. That faithfulness woke you up this morning. That faithfulness has you breathing in this moment. That faithfulness has you sitting here looking at me, paying attention to what's going on, what I'm saying, while your body takes care of everything else that it needs to do. That's God's faithfulness at work. In his book, the book of poverty and death, I can't remember his name. Rilke's book of hours, love poems to God. This is what he writes. It feels as though I make my way through massive rock like a vein of ore, alone, encased. I am so deep inside it, I can't see the path or any distance. Everything is close, and everything closing in on me as stone. Since I still don't know enough about pain, this terrible darkness makes me small. If it's you, though, press down hard on me. Break in that I may know the weight of your hand, and you, the fullness of my cry. Now, in this, let me see if I can find it here. Bear with me a second. In a video, I think it was yesterday or day before, I heard this quote, and I was sort of like taken aback by this quote. And it's from a book by Father Crud. Yeah, Father Crud. Oh no, I can't find the name. Anyways, here it is. Mark Foley. Father Mark Foley. And it's on the life of, I don't know how to say it exactly. It's Tertiaire, I think. Tertiaire of Lisieux, which was a French like nunnery, right? They were Carmelites, which I don't know a lot about that. I didn't honestly look that up. But they have their own like sort of set of, beliefs and stuff, but it follows the Catholic faith. But anyways, Saint Tertiaire, she was a nun in this place in France, and as she was growing up, she dealt with all this terrible illness. Her family was like, her mom died at a young age. Her dad was committed to an insane asylum. Like, it was all this stuff, right? Just dealing with the enormous difficulty, right? The human condition. And she, at the age of 24, she actually died with tuberculosis, which she had battled for years and years. But she wrote some of these, she wrote some things down. And of course, those things were published. And I mean, she was made a saint, right? So that doesn't happen until after you die. And you have to do like 3 things basically to qualify for sainthood. But from this book, the context of holiness. That's the name of the book. So if you want to go look it up, read it, then go ahead. Feel free. But the context of holiness, he says, the nature of healing. Freud once said that therapy ends when we are dealing with our problems and they are no longer dealing with us. 35 years ago, when I was a gung-ho undergraduate psychology major, Freud's viewpoint sounded pessimistic and depressing. Now, as a man in his 60s who is still struggling with the same fears and neurotic tendencies that I wrestled with in my youth, I see Freud's perspective as being realistic. For are not our deeply rooted, deeply embedded, and deeply entrenched personality traits chronic, obdurate, and unyielding by definition? Even though I believe that by the grace of God, I am not the man I was 35 years ago, I can honestly say that much emotional healing has taken place in my heart. Nevertheless, during times of stress, when my old fears and neurotic compulsions well up within me in all their savage intensity, I feel that nothing has changed, and I say to myself, will I ever be rid of this fear? Good Lord. When am I ever going to be free of this? How often have you said that to yourself? And then he says, once I could accept the answer, never, I felt a great weight taken off my shoulders, for I was released from the impossible goal of trying to become someone other than myself. Yeah. I was released from the impossible goal of trying to become someone other than myself. And this is the last line of that little clause. He says, working on yourself can be an insidious mask of self-hate, for it makes you feel that there is something wrong with you until you are, quote unquote, healed. Working on yourself can be an insidious mask of self-hate because it makes you feel like there's something wrong with you until you're, quote unquote, healed. Now, I know, and I've heard Jordan Peterson say this too, like, you don't want to be who you were when you were 12 or 13 or 16 or 18 or 25 or whatever, right? You don't want to be that person necessarily, because maybe then, maybe when you were 16 or 17 years old, you were depressed, you hated the world, you had no hope, you felt like, life was going to come to an end any second or whatever, right? You had nothing to look forward to. Okay, well, you don't want to be that person. Then again, too, maybe you feel like that today. Maybe you felt like that then and you feel like it today. The question is, when will all this go away? When will the enormous difficulty be taken off of my shoulders? When will I no longer have to carry this burden? When will I be fixed? Right? When will I be fixed? When will I stop having to deal with this problem or that problem, this addiction or that addiction, this trap or that trap? Whatever it is, when will I have to stop? Now, listen. Take it or leave it, right? Never. But if that's the case, then my God, what a relief. I can literally stop working on this. Stop working against yourself, fighting yourself, literally wrestling yourself to the ground to try to get you to stop these behaviors and embrace who you are. Now, does that mean that you continue in those negative behaviors just haphazardly? It's like Paul says, where grace does abound, where sin did abound, grace did much more abound. Should we continue in sin? God forbid. No, don't continue in your sin for the sake of continuing in your sin.
And sin, by the way, hamartia, missed the mark. I'm not living as the person that I should be. That's what that word means in the Greek, okay? It's got nothing to do really with your behaviors. It's got everything to do with who you're being. So stop trying to be something that you're not. Get convinced that you're like your Father and live in the faithfulness that is planted on the inside of you. Because God's faithfulness is calling out to your faith to stand up, to resurrect, to grow, to reach for the sky. That's what God's faithfulness is calling your faith to. I'm going to read you this last little piece. Those that are getting baptized, you can go ahead and get ready. An archetypal story of the process of internalization is The Ugly Duckling by Hans Christian Andersen. The story begins with the egg of a swan being hatched by a duck in a barnyard. Because it appeared different from the other ducklings, it is looked down upon as ugly. The poor duckling, this is from the book, the poor duckling was chased and mistreated by everyone. Even his mother said, "I wish you were far away." At last, the duckling ran away. It flew over the tops of the bushes, frightening all the little birds so that they flew up into the air. They too think I am ugly, thought the duckling. Outer evaluation became inner evaluation. But at the end of the story, there is healing. There is healing. I know, when will there ever be healing, right? So one day, the ugly duckling caught sight of some beautiful swans and felt an uncanny attraction. He did not know the name of those birds, yet he felt that he loved them as he had never loved any other creatures. However, because he believed himself to be so ugly, he feared that if he approached them, they would peck him to death. But there was something stronger than fear in him. A strange longing that he recognized in their call to one another. At the end of the story, the duckling approached the swans, expecting to be killed. But to his surprise, they encircled and caressed him. When the duckling opened his eyes, he saw his true image in the water, that of a beautiful swan. The story of the ugly duckling and Freud's concept of the Uber-Ich intimate a deep spiritual truth of nature, namely that we can only see ourselves in the eyes of another. Did you know that you've never seen yourself, actually? You've only ever seen a reflection in a mirror. You've never actually seen yourself. So you really don't even know what you look like. Like literally. You have a perception of yourself. You have a view of yourself, right? But until you can look into the reflective waters, and what Freud called the Uber-Ich, that was the superego, right? That's you trying to override yourself, override your true identity, override the ugly in you, the things that you think are ugly. It's the perspective that you have. It's the perception that you have of yourself. But in order to overcome all of this, right? In order to overcome all of it, it requires you to act. Sorry. It requires you to act. How many of you know who David Goggins is? Anybody? All right, David Goggins is he's a freak of nature is what he is. The man is like, he's insane, okay? So David Goggins, he's about 6'4", somewhere around there, 6'3". He used to weigh like 380 pounds, almost 400 pounds, something crazy, 350, almost 400 pounds, right? And he was miserable. I think he was like 24 years old or something, like 21 years old, somewhere in that range, right? He's overweight, he's fat, he's obese. He was dealing with these health issues that he had. He was working for a pest company, and he was just done, right? He was just done with life. He was sitting at home in his recliner, watching TV, just got done eating whatever he was eating, and he's watching, or he sees a commercial. And the commercial is for the Navy. It's the Navy SEALs specifically. And just in that moment, he said, I want to do that. I want to be one of those guys. So the next morning, he calls up the local recruiting offices, and they ask him some questions, just some basic questions or whatever, and they're like, "Man, we can't help you. Like you'll have to go, somewhere else. Go join the Army or whatever." Well, he was dead set on being a Navy SEAL. Finally, he finds a recruiter. When he's talking to him on the phone, he's like, "Listen, I don't have time to kind of go through the process here. Well, why don't you come see me tomorrow in my office? Here's the address." So he drives over there, sees the guy. Now, David's black, and at the time, he was meeting a lot of just racial resistance, right? So he goes into the office. The gentleman that is the recruiter, he's also black. And so he immediately feels kind of a connection with him, and the guy says to him, he's like, "There's no way. You cannot be a Navy. Look at you." He's like, "You need to get out of here. Like, good luck with your life, And he's like, no. He said, "I want to be a Navy SEAL. I'll do anything that I have to do to do this." And so the guy says, "All right, I tell you what, the next camp is in June or whatever. And this is like 3 months away, 4 months away, something like that, something stupid." He says, "If you can drop 100 pounds between now and the start of the camp, then I'll sign you up." 3 months, 4 months, whatever it was, he drops 100 pounds. Incredibly difficult, he talks about how hard it was, et cetera, et cetera. He gets in, joins the Navy, goes through the whole spiel, ends up going to what do they call it? The SEAL training. What is it? BUDS, the BUDS training, right? That's the one that you've seen on TV, I'm sure. They got them on the beach. They're drowning them. They're whatever. They're doing all kinds of crazy stuff, They wake you up at midnight. They don't let you sleep for a whole week. It's just a whole thing. So he gets to Hell Week. That's what it's called. He gets to Hell Week in the BUDS training, and he doesn't make it. Rings the bell. Goes back. Signs back up for BUDS training when he can, when he qualifies again. Doesn't make it. Rings the bell. Has to go back to, normal duties or whatever. Third time's a charm. The third attempt. Now, this is unprecedented. Nobody else has ever done this in the history of the Navy or in the history of the Navy SEALs. David's the only one. Third time's a charm. He gets it. After that, he completed the only other 2 elite trainings in the U.S. military. That's the Army Rangers and Green Beret. The Green Beret. Completed both of those trainings. So he was a Navy SEAL. He was all, whatever. And one day, this is just who David is, right? One day, he decides he's going to start running. Like, he already ran, just for his regular fitness routine. But he decides he's going to start running. So he does it. He pulls a Forrest Gump, basically. He runs 20 miles a day. 20 miles a day. Okay? So he ends up doing this. They have these marathons that they do. It's an international event. It's 100 and something miles. It's like 100 and, I don't know. Or maybe it's like 101 miles or something like that. So he signs up for one of these events. And at the time, I think he was married. He goes through the whole thing, the whole process or whatever. They start the race, and you have to meet these certain mile markers, checkpoints, right? So he's going, and at one point he misses one of the checkpoints, but it was because of like an injury or whatever, and he had injured his leg, and so he actually left the race. He was going to quit. He was going to be done with it. He didn't want to, but he was hurting, and his advisor or whatever for the race was like, "Man, you just need to stop. Like, tackle this another day." He went home, and he was trying to sleep. Or he went wherever they were staying. He was trying to sleep. He could not go to sleep. He called his advisor. He's like, "I need you to get me back in the race. How much longer do I have to meet the next checkpoint?" And through the injury, through the pain, all this stuff, he goes and completes the race. Now, it's kind of gruesome, but when he finally got to he's peaking the hill, coming close to the end of the race, he was chafed so bad there was blood running down his legs. His shoe was filled with blood. I mean, the whole thing, right? So that's the kind of intense stuff we're talking about. At one point, David broke his leg, and they had to remove some of the bone. It's gross, but he could like grab his calf and like leave his fingers imprinted in there. It was awful. It was awful. So he ends up writing a book, and he gets this guy, Dr. Huberman. I can't remember his first name, but you can look him up. He's like the head of the neuropsychology department at Harvard, Andrew Huberman, and he saw that David's book was coming out. He shot him a text. He's like, "Hey man, congratulations on the book. You know, this, that, and the other." And Huberman's on the West Coast, David's on the East Coast, and he's like, "Thanks, man. Would you mind writing a little review or whatever, or a little excerpt for the book?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure, that'd be great." He's like, "But I need it tonight." He's like, I need to get it from you tonight." So Huberman had met David through this experiment, basically, that they were doing, right? It was a little study that they were doing. And the study was, basically, they study in his lab, like, fear and motivation, you know, what causes people to, you know, to act or not act, you know, all that kind of stuff. So they study the whole thing. From the time you walk in, they're studying you, right? And one of the things they use is like virtual reality and stuff like that. So, you know, they have these things, they can put these VR goggles on you and hook you up to all these machines. They can make it feel like spiders are crawling all over your skin. They can make it feel like you're in intense heat, or, you know, or you're falling, or, you know, you're confronting like an animal or whatever. Well, in this case, he brought up sharks with this group, and David was in the group, and David said, "I hate sharks. I hate them." And so, you know, Andrew's like, okay. It's like, he's like, okay, well, he's making it known that he hates sharks. All right, that's great. He said, so we started the program. We said, we're going to start, this is what we're going to start with, the shark video or whatever. It's like you're swimming with them, you know. And he said, look, he said, you know it's fake. He said, but it's really immersive, so it really feels like it's going on. And so it can elicit those intense fear responses. And he says, all right, who wants to go first? And David says, I'll go first. Like without hesitation, before anybody could say anything, he said, I'll go first. And the thing about David, he couldn't share the results necessarily of all the testing and stuff, but the thing about David that Huberman observed, he said, whatever it is that causes people to act, right, to jump in or to back up, David has figured out a way to control that system. He's figured out a way to activate that system and not move backwards or stand still in fear or paralyzed by whatever it is, the circumstances that are going on, but to move forward. I tell you that story to say that if today you find that maybe it's really difficult to believe in God's faithfulness, if you find the enormous difficulty weighing heavy on your shoulders, if you find that you're viewing yourself constantly as the ugly duckling, separated from God, no good, totally thrown away, shouldn't even be here, don't know why anybody cares, I don't feel like anybody cares, so on and so forth. If those are the feelings that you're having, I'm telling you today, activate your faith through action. Whatever it is, the call that you hear, because I know you hear it. I know you feel the tug on the heartstrings. I know you hear the voice of adventure calling you. Like an Abraham, take your faith and step out onto it. You can't see, it's the Indiana Jones scene. He steps out into the chasm, right? And it's an invisible bridge, or looks like an invisible bridge, right? But it's there. When he steps, it's there. Pull an Abraham. Listen to the call of God's faithfulness in your life as it's perpetuated through you in your faith. Because God's faithfulness is activating your faith. And what your faith does is activates others' faith. Because then you become full of it. The more you act on your faith, the more you become full of it. The more you step out, the more you reach out, the more you answer the call to adventure. Whatever it is that God's calling you to, whatever action He's calling you to. Maybe it's something as simple as going up and hugging your spouse. Maybe that's hard for you to do. Maybe it's complimenting your spouse. Maybe that's hard for you to do. Maybe it's telling your children, I love you. Maybe it's hugging your child, holding your child, letting them sit on your lap. I mean, y'all looking at me hard, but I mean, people have difficulty with these things, especially when the things that were perpetuated with them was self-hatred and self-loathing and discarding and throwing away. Those are the things that people struggle with. That's part of the enormous difficulty. That's part of the burden that people are carrying. Maybe that's what's going on. But I'm telling you right now that those delusions, those illusions, those masks, all of that stuff that's not really you, that you're wearing and that you're carrying around, the only way to strip yourself of it and be the real you is to act. That action, it moves you forward. And yes, you may deal with those things the rest of your life. I can't promise you that you won't, because I still deal with things. I still deal with things. But it is my faith in action. Faith without works is dead. It's dead. So, take that little seed of faith. Let it die to your reason and your logic. Stop saying all the reasons that you can't. Well, I can't love because I wasn't loved. I can't do because nobody did for me. Stop all that and just do. Just do. Just act. Just speak, because that's what God did. That's what God did. That's what God does. He acts and He speaks. It's a moving. It's an action. It's a going. And speaking of actions, there are some little ones this morning who are taking their faith and they're putting legs on it. They're taking their faith, they're putting wheels on it. I see that face, little girl. They're taking their faith and they're jumping off the cliff. They're running out into the adventure. The call of God. They heard it. They heard it. This isn't just, well, I saw some other little kid get baptized, so now I want to get baptized. That's not what that is. That's the Spirit of God calling to these little ones. They're closer to God than we are right now. The Native Americans believe that children and elderly, they're closer to God because they're the closest to death and life. Death and rebirth. Death and rebirth. Death and rebirth. That's what's about to happen right now. All these things that somebody tried to put on these babies. All this stuff that somebody tried to hang on them, stuff that people try to pile on them, and the rest of their life, they're going to have stuff people are going to try to pile on top of them. But today, death and resurrection. Death, burial, resurrection. Following in the footsteps of our brother Jesus Christ, our big brother Jesus Christ, because we don't have a high priest who's not been touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but He stepped into our humanity. He humbled Himself and He put on the form of a servant, and He was obedient unto death. The enormous difficulty that you feel, Christ felt every bit of it. All of the pressure of God's hand pressing down on Him, and God the Father heard His cry. And if He heard Him, He hears you, and He will answer. I'm just asking you to do it. Whatever it is, do it. Get baptized in Jesus' name. All right. I love Him because He first loved me. God bless you.